Secretary of the House Committee's Standing Committee on Science and Research. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order on June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. For our first panel today, we are going to continue our study on the support for commercialization of intellectual property. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefits of witnesses and members. Interpretation for the Zoom, you have the choice of at the bottom of your screen, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For the members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function, and the clerk and I will do best with a speaking order when appropriate. In accordance with our routine motions, I am informing the committee that all our witnesses have completed the required connection test in advance of this meeting. We will start our meeting with two opening rounds of 5 minutes each from our presenters. I now welcome to present Dr. Bogar for 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Bonjour, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for the time that you and members of the committee have granted me today. I wish to particularly thank Member Diab for her invitation. For the past 7 years, I've been CEO of IRICOR, a Centre for Excellence in Commercialization and Research, CECR, specializing in drug discovery based at the Institute for Research in Immunology and Cancer at the University of Montreal. I was called upon to think about the theme of commercialization of IP, which ensures the success of the organization. The goal was to create therapeutic solutions for patients with cancer or rare diseases. During the height of COVID, according to StatCan, 80,000 deaths were due to cancer, followed by 50,000 from cardiovascular disease. Deaths from COVID ranked third. For cancer, the situation was and still remains particularly alarming because diagnoses dropped dramatically without a decline in incidence. And the discovery of innovative therapeutic solutions in this field is more relevant than ever if we want to face the wave of new cases of cancer. In my view, one of the solutions is the efficient commercialization of Canadian intellectual property. This activity is at the heart of IRICOR's pan-Canadian mandate, namely to accelerate the discovery and development of projects leading to the commercialization of new therapies. For us, commercialization relates to the establishment of co-development partnerships with the biopharm industry and the creation of spin-off companies. The socioeconomic returns of our activities go beyond the marketing of new drugs. The IRICOR solution for financing and supporting the best drug discovery projects in oncology and rare diseases towards their next value inflection point is of utmost relevance for Canadian innovation to actually benefit patients. Year after year, this model contributes to enhancing the value of investments made by the government in basic research, to propelling Quebec and the rest of Canada in particular by attracting foreign capital, which directly funds Canadian R&D, by creating and maintaining high value-added jobs in a crucial sector for the country, and by creating new spin-off companies. We have entered into partnerships in Canada and internationally with big private sector players, such as Ipsen, AbbVie, BMS, to promote Canadian innovation resulting from projects initially supported by us. The key is that we use government funding before establishing partnerships with industry or creating companies. This allows us to create intellectual property of even greater value, allowing us to achieve major financial returns for our academic institutions, for our research teams, and for organizations like ours, while maintaining the know-how in Canada. This made in Canada know-how created between co-created between the public and private sectors, which is not traditionally found in academia, is a major asset that is used to develop new projects. IRICOR's investment and business support also attract organizations complementary to ours, such as Canadian Technology Transfer Offices, the Stem Cell Network, Ottawa, CCRM in Toronto, Admare, local investment companies like CTI Life Sciences and the FSTQ, and international ones like Advent Life Sciences, towards the creation of companies based in Quebec, conducting clinical studies around the world. I'm talking here about examples like Excel Thera, Epitopia, Rejuvenate RX that we helped create. In 2019, Canada had the lowest level of R&D funding from businesses among OECD and G7 countries. Since then, the federal government has deployed several initiatives, such as the Strategic Science Fund, but we can do more. IRICOR is a reference model that the federal government must continue to support and that should be adopted in other sectors to position Canada among the best in terms of commercialization of intellectual property. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm prepared to answer your questions.
Gar, now for 5 minutes, we have Professor Karim.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to speak. My name is Karim Salahuddin, and I'm the Associate Vice President, Commercialization and Entrepreneurship at the University of Waterloo. I'll point out that much of our work at Waterloo takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabeg and the Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. The University of Waterloo started as an unconventional institution, and this has led to a leadership position in intellectual property development and commercialization. The university has a creator-owned IP rights policy that grants full ownership to the inventor. This policy has given rise to a university culture that has become the engine for driving commercialization success of student-led and research-based innovations. I'll draw your attention to 2 of our important commercialization initiatives currently. Velocity, Canada's most productive incubator, has incubated 434 companies since 2008. These companies, in turn, have generated more than $35 billion in enterprise value and created more than 5,000 jobs. University industry collaborations have served over 1,100 companies in the Advanced Manufacturing Consortium, a partnership between the universities McMaster, Western, and Waterloo. Debate on Canada's innovation and productivity gap often centers on research and development within existing private companies. However, the activities and role played by post-secondary institutions like Waterloo are filling a gap today that private enterprises cannot fill effectively. I'll mention 3 ways how this is done. Universities like Waterloo train large volumes of highly entrepreneurial students who, through their experience with co-op education, are motivated to bring productivity innovations to market. Students can often achieve this faster than incumbent enterprises as they are not constrained by any particular business model, like most SMEs. Given the necessary supports like the Velocity Incubator, these students are very successful agents of change and have generated productivity-based startup unicorns for Canada. Recent examples include Applyboard and FAIR. Number 2, post-secondary institutions generate the majority of R&D-based deep tech discoveries. Deep tech is disruptive. Think about what happened to Kodak with the advent of digital cameras and Yellow Pages with the advent of online search. To commercialize deep tech, both capital and specialized technical labor is required, but most Canadian enterprises either don't have the will or perhaps the ability to commercialize deep tech. An alternate way to commercialize deep tech is through university startups. These startups involve the university inventor, especially since it is the inventors that have much of the tacit knowledge to commercialize. They also benefit from a supply of specialized, trained graduate students who act as diffusers of this knowledge from academia to the startup. And these students often take up leadership positions within the startup instead of heading south for more lucrative opportunities. Number 3, economic growth and social impact are often not well aligned. Challenges such as a net zero economy, climate change, sustainable healthcare, inequality, food insecurity continue to exist despite decades of strong economic growth. Private enterprises do not take on these challenges because the financial returns are modest and the time to returns can be very long. But sustainable social enterprises founded on university campuses like Waterloo can take on these societal challenges, and they do. They attract qualified employees who are motivated by the social mission, and they find capital to grow from a new breed of social impact investors and governments who value social impact alongside financial returns. I'll make 3 recommendations. We recommend that the Government of Canada provide more focused investment into increasing university commercialization capacity. Research, innovation, and commercialization are part of a continuum. If we constrain one part of the pipeline in favor of another, the whole ecosystem and Canadian society suffers. Number 2, universities should be included in any new programming supplied by the CIC to ensure that no innovation opportunity is left on the sidelines. We need CIC and other programs for universities to advance the commercial readiness of new technologies for translation to startups or private sector. Number 3, the CIC should engage deeply with experts at universities and incubators who have proven track records of commercializing specialized technology. To close our research and development gap, Canada needs a much more coordinated approach than what is currently happening. If we continue looking at education, research, and commercialization as mutually exclusive, the productivity gap only continues to widen. Thank you. I can take questions now.
Thank you so much, Professor Karim and Dr. Bogar. We now will enter our 6-minute round of questioning. To kick it off, we have MP Williams for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for our witnesses for coming to this important study today. Professor Karim, I'm going to start with you if I can, sir. The president of university was in front of this committee a little while back on an earlier study, and an alarming statistic is that in Canada we lose 75% of our computer science graduates and software engineers to the United States. I'm curious what the rate is for intellectual property. Do we see the same rate for intellectual property leaving, venture capital coming in and taking that IP out of Canada? And if we do, how do we stop it from leaving?
No, that's a great question. I don't know the exact numbers for how much of our IP is leaving Canada, but I can say one thing. Deep tech, which is where a lot of IP resides, is difficult to commercialize within Canada for the reasons I mentioned previously. One, our companies do not have the capacity to commercialize or sometimes the will. In that situation, it's not unlikely that this IP would leave Canada to find a home where it could be commercialized. Now, the second part of your question is, how do we stop that from happening? So, if we're trying to stop that from happening, we need to enable Canadian businesses to be able to commercialize deep tech and stay in Canada. And I mentioned existing businesses sometimes don't have the ability or will to do so. Startups are a very interesting alternative. Startups are inherently tied to the country because the inventors are tied to the universities. And their graduate students, if you can attract them and prevent them from leaving by offering them leadership opportunities, would stick around. So we are seeing, in a sense, a rise in deep tech in Canada that is focused on startups coming out of universities, like Waterloo. So that's one option.
So, and my next question is, how are we funding commercialization then? And I understand we've talked a lot in the past about R&D, and we spend a lot of money on applied research. But how specifically do you see, or how is, through the university system, University of Waterloo, how are we funding commercialization?
Now, that's, again, a really, really, I think it's a very pointed question, and I think it's a good question. The universities, with the current funding that we get from government, can take technologies like deep tech up to prototype stages. For example, the tri-councils like NSERC have I2I programs and others that enable that. Once that happens, you have to get the technology out of the company, either to a private sector or to a startup. That money has to come from angel investors or VCs. Now, within Canada, we don't have a very large number of venture capitalists who would go into high-risk deep tech. So you have to rely on angels. And oftentimes, the other way to do this is to rely on strategic investors, i.e. other Canadian companies who may see value in the technology but don't have the resources internally to do so, so they'll invest in a startup to have it grow.
So in your opinion, for venture capital, how much is coming from the U.S. and how much is Canadian at this point? Even a percentage-wise.
So, yeah, no, it's a good question. I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but anecdotally, I would suspect that a larger share is coming from the United States than is coming from Canada.
Are there active venture capital groups that operate through the university, coordinated through the university at this point?
The university does coordinate with VCs and micro VCs for sure. The university, being a charity, obviously is not going to run their own VC because it is a for-profit enterprise, but there are interactions that do occur.
Do a lot of those interactions happen with Communitech in Waterloo?
Absolutely. Communitech is part of the big picture. It is a key regional player who helps provide education and connections. The other piece is, of course, Velocity, which is a university incubator. It's a not-for-profit, and we've realized a lot of value through that Velocity incubator. Velocity also has quite a few connections, both locally and in the United States, and brings in funding to the startups that are in the Velocity incubator space. There's also, of course, the Accelerator Center in the Waterloo region that is also coordinating. All of these work together to make sure that the ecosystem is vibrant.
One of the things that when I've done research for the U.S. is they seem to almost not even have to look for it. There's enough angel investment, enough venture capitalism that in the universities, they don't have to do that. But in Canada, it seems from other testimony, we really have to work hard at it. Do you think there's things that we can do from the government side that would encourage, the big, large network you have at alumni, the swath of businesses that have certainly benefited from not just the Waterloo area, but across Canada from your institution? Do you think there's recommendations that we could see that encourages more angel investment, venture capital from different human capital sides in Canada, not just from the government?
So I'll make an interesting point here. Venture capital is often synonymous with taking risk. But the real question you're asking is, what type of risk are VCs taking? VCs most often do not take on technological risk, they take on market risk. And what I mean by that is they're happy to take a product or a prototype that is nearly commercial ready, and they're happy to try and see how to get it introduced into the market. Most VCs in Canada or the United States do not have the means or the capacity or the intention to take on technological risk. Technological risk in the United States is overcome by government programs like the SBIR or the STTR programs. These are very large, substantial pools of funding that can be obtained not just by small businesses, but also by universities and university startups. They can offer sometimes up to $2 million US of funding over the course of a year or two, which can be very instrumental in bringing deep tech to market.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Much. Now we will be moving to Madame Diab, that is online for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome to both our witnesses. Bienvenue à nos témoins aujourd'hui.
Welcome to our witnesses today.
Madame Bogart,
Mrs. Bogart, it's a pleasure to see you here at our committee this morning. I have a few questions for you. First of all, I want to say that I was very pleased to meet you at the lunch organized by my colleague Valerie with the stem cell group. And I'm sure you have a lot of information and advice for our study here today. So, could you tell us a bit more about your experience and the work you personally did on commercialization, particularly in the healthcare area. Very well. Thank you very much, Ms. Diab. It was my great pleasure, too. So I can certainly go in more detail about our sector. We're in the drug discovery sector. As I mentioned, with the pandemic, we've seen the importance of that sector for Canada's economy. One point that I would mention, and that joins up with the previous comments, is that I'm taking the one example, but it's a model that we could apply more broadly throughout Canada. One of the problems we've seen is the need to have high-value assets that can be developed in an academic milieu before the creation of a company. And I think that would mitigate the risk that may be perceived by venture capital companies in Canada as well as U.S. ones. So by conducting that exercise in the academic environment, and I see that Professor Karim has also developed those kinds of activities within the University of Waterloo, I think it's models like that that allow us to advance and increase the value of our innovation and Canadian intellectual property before we establish partnerships with industry. When I talk about partnerships, as you mentioned, our personal experience, or that we had within IRICA, these are partnerships with pharmaceutical companies, but international ones. So we have to show that our Canadian innovation attracts major investments. For our part, in the first 10 years, we funded projects at various stages of development in drug discovery to the tune of about $5 or $6 million. But those investments allowed us to attract over $50 to $60 million in R&D funding from international companies. So for us, contrary to deep tech, companies and headquarters of pharmaceutical companies are often outside Canada, but despite this, we have been able to attract those funds. What I must also add is that what completes this return for Canada beyond R&D funding is when you have contracts that we establish with these companies. So we're talking about intellectual property, we're talking about developing know-how. At IRICA, we have developed, together with Canadian research teams, new intellectual property. But afterwards, we also establish collaboration partnerships with big pharmaceutical companies. That allows for the transfer of knowledge between research teams in academia and pharmaceutical industry research teams. And that know-how developed jointly leads to returns for the research teams, for the academic institutions in Canada, for organizations like ours, and that allows us to reinvest in research projects and to continue and have sustainability, starting with federal and provincial funds. Thank you very much. I'd like to know whether, in your opinion, are we doing better in Canada when it comes to commercialization in healthcare compared to other areas, such as clean tech? Well, I must say that I have not followed other areas as closely, but I think that the initiatives I was mentioning, such as the Scientific Strategy Fund, which is crucial for an area such as healthcare and science, I'm sure that there are other opportunities that the government has to explore and support organizations like ours, IRICA, so that value added can be leveraged. We were talking about human capital, but there's also things we don't find in the academic milieu. It's things that we find in industry, in the private sector, people who worked in venture capital, in intellectual property. It's all that know-how that is added to the scientific expertise and excellence. Do you have any last words to encourage us here as parliamentarians, but also to help our discussion when it comes to commercialization in healthcare? Yes, I think that we've done very well jointly. I applaud the government's initiative because it is really through the federal government that a program such as the commercialization program and the centers of excellence that created success stories like this. I think we should continue that kind of support, and more specifically for organizations that have demonstrated that they are capable of delivering, and that will allow us to increase the number of new companies for Canada, to feed the entrepreneurial tissue of this country, which is so important for us, so that we don't depend on human and financial capital from outside of Canada only. Thank you very much, Madam. I think my time is up.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, that's all right.
Merci
I do
beaucoup.
like
Thank
to
you.
let the witnesses finish their thoughts. I will cut off members, but I won't cut off witnesses unless it goes extreme. Now on to MP Blanchette for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I salute the witnesses and thank them for being here. My first question is for Ms. Beaugé. I'm pleased to welcome you to this committee for this important study, and I want to underscore your commitment to IRICA. I know you've been with it for many years. Now you're in new challenges, but nevertheless, I want to underscore your excellent work. Very proud to have an organization like IRICA in Quebec. It has strong power in transformation of research conducted in Quebec as well as elsewhere in Canada and the world for very innovative therapeutic solutions. So, Ms. Beaugé, my colleague asked you, what's the status of the situation? It's Canada's position when it comes to commercialization of intellectual property. The last data we have from the Department of Innovation that dates back to 2016, Canada was ranked 31st for the number of trademark applications. That is out of OECD countries. There are 37 OECD countries, so 31 out of 37. What's your opinion of this? Well, as I mentioned, I think that we can do better. What you mentioned, and I thank you very much for your kind words, by the way, what you've stated is one part of intellectual property. It's very important, that is trademarks. But beyond trademarks, there are also patents. There are also, it's one of the aspects that we have to follow closely. I think that given the level of innovation, the level of investment that both the federal and provincial governments have put into research, we are able to transform those precocious investments toward intellectual property that can be commercialized at a larger scale. Quite clearly, we can do that. Now, once again, I think that organizations like ours that work in cooperation with technology transfer organizations and other organizations throughout Canada, it's all together that we can really increase the value of intellectual property and even create new intellectual property with public funds in order to establish partnerships with industry. And that will certainly allow us to be in a better position within OECD and G7 countries. Thank you, Ms. Beaugé. I'd like to add to what you said. There's another aspect that you mentioned, that is patents. When it comes to patents, a series of patents for the same invention, if you compare to Japan, U.S., etc., we're 19th out of 37 countries. I'm not great at math, but 19 out of 37, It's not necessarily pass the test for a G7 country like Canada. So let me go on to other questions. Ms. Bourget, in your opening remarks, you talked about the low investment of the federal government for R&D. You said that Canada was dead last among G7 countries in 2019. I'd add that Canada is the only G7 country to have reduced its investments in the past 20 years. It's the only country to have lost researchers among G7 countries in the last 6 years. So I think the picture is quite somber, and I'm trying to understand. For you, somebody who headed up an organization like Iricor, how can you be competitive and try to demarcate yourself on the international scene when we have a government that does not make such R&D investment a priority? So I'd like to hear your views on that. Very well. Indeed, the figures do show that there's room for improvement. What I want to say is, and what I did say for 2019, is that R&D funding coming from companies is what puts Canada at the bottom rank. I think there is improvement. Since 2019, there has been additional funding that was put forth in this country. These are initiatives that must be continued because, once again, and let me get back to the question of patents. For too many years, what was done is that we used the number of patents as the sole performance indicator. Whereas what we're seeing, and I'm talking about our field in particular, when it comes to drug discovery, we have to ensure that we apply for patents that are high value, things that allow us to have major financial returns. So it's a chain that will allow us to demarcate ourselves and increase the value of what we have here in Canada. So to get back to your question, I think for the government, it's a matter of channeling its funding toward organizations that deliver the goods, that deliver high-value products, and that attract that R&D funding from outside the country. So very quickly, Ms. Bourget, you said there's room for improvement. The U.S. are our neighbors. They've doubled the National Science Foundation budget. That is the biggest R&D financing program they have. How can we compete here in Canada? We're lagging behind. The U.S. is very competitive. Science is competitive. I don't think you have time to get into detail, but you can give us your opinion in writing. With pleasure.
Now moving on to MP Cannings for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you to both the witnesses here today. I'm going to start with Mr. Karim and some of the recommendations you made. You had three. Two of them mentioned specifically CIC, the Canada Innovation Corporation. And then you went on later to talk about the differences with the American situation. Here we have an economy that's 10 times the size of ours and arguably a different culture around investment and risk. And then you mentioned there was American government incentives on top of that. And I'm just wondering if you could comment more in more detail about what the American government provides startups or other companies as compared with what Canada is doing right now, and how that relates to your recommendations that you mentioned around the CIC.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So to answer that question, I'm going to address a couple of points that came up just before. So one of the points was, why is Canada lagging in patents and trademarks? The answer to that lies in how many large pharmaceutical and or high-tech firms we have in this country. The US and Japan, the US especially, has a very large number of high-tech firms like Google, Apple, Facebook. These are your drivers of patents. Trademarks come because you're pushing out new products. The pharmaceutical folks and high tech are always pushing out new products, so you'll see a large number of trademark applications. The reason why Canada is lagging is because we don't have large pharmaceutical or high-tech firms in this country. We have some decent ones, OpenText, for example, but in the past, we used to have Nortel and BlackBerry that were driving a lot of that. We don't have that now, right? So to come to your question now directly, what is the US doing that's giving it such high returns? I think they're actually investing in early stage innovation more effectively than we are. And this goes to the three recommendations, right? The US, I mentioned, had these SBIR and STTR programs. Both of those programs can be applied for not just by small businesses within the United States, but also universities. You can take researchers out of the university or the national labs. They can go run a startup and get funded through these programs for 2 years to get the startup and the prototype to a level that might attract VC investment. By doing lots of this consistently over time, they have created a pipeline of innovation. And that's what eventually ends up giving them the long run advantage. In our case, we don't have such a program in Canada. And in fact, when we do put these programs, we try and section universities and research, education, and commercialization into different buckets. We have to kind of start to put these three together to make sure that all three have the ability to work synergistically.
Well, thank you. You mentioned, big pharmaceutical companies, and I'd like to turn to Madame Beauger and ask her to comment on that because, Madame Beauger, you mentioned, how important it was for, your researchers to interact with big pharmaceuticals to move up and grow. And I can only imagine that the investments that Big Pharma is providing is often buying those ideas, those innovations, that IP, and moving it out of Canada. Is that correct? Is that the price we pay for not having big pharmaceuticals in Canada?
So thank you for the question. Thank you for the question. So what I would I would put a nuance that big pharmas. So when there's a collaboration between big pharma and the research teams that we're working with, that we had worked with at Iricor, actually there is an initial recognition of the value of the research that we have developed together. So there are some, when we're talking about dollars, there are some initial upfront license fees that the companies pay. The other thing I would point out is that there's joint IP that is developed between the research teams within the pharma companies and within the research teams. So this joint IP is recognized through some payments that are made throughout the development of the projects, be it within Canada or outside when there's development made by the companies, be it if they're based in the US or in Europe. So there are constant financial returns for our public sector in Canada in return for those collaborative projects. So I think that with models like ours, it's a reality. So we have to see that, for example, in the pharmaceutical market, the Canadian market for pharma companies is quite small. So it's for sure what they'll do is launch their products outside of Canada. But there is this portion of innovation is crucial, and we can, and with the model we've demonstrated it, that we can have significant returns for the country on innovations that we have developed. I would add as well that there are some royalty payments that are made to the institutions, to the public organizations in return for the market introduction of innovations made in Canada. So those are all the returns, tangible returns that we have. And I would add even more that with regards to the, as I mentioned, the savoir-faire. So this is something when there is connection between or collaboration between research teams in academia and in those big pharma companies, all this knowledge is invaluable for next projects coming out of our academic institutions in Canada that can benefit from this know-how going forward and to create new IP coming out of Canada.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Now moving on to our 5-minute round, we have Dan Mazer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, the witnesses, for coming out here today. Dr. Karim, how many patents have you filed?
So you're talking about personally, or are you referring to from a university perspective?
University perspective, that's...
Okay, so I would probably argue we are filing more than we know how many our professors are filing, but our students are also filing patents. And those are harder to track. But I would probably say it's on the order of at least close to 100, maybe higher annually.
Okay, good. How many of those patents have resulted in commercialized product?
Again, I have to go back and review our exact numbers, and I can probably get back to you. But I can also throw in that I myself have been involved in commercialization through the university, so I can say for certain that at least 21 of those have resulted in a range of commercial products.
Oh, congratulations. That is something you do track, though, right? As a university and as...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
and I can get those numbers if you're interested.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
And how many of your patents are now owned by non-Canadian organizations or individuals?
That's a good question. I have to go back and get the answer to that. I wouldn't be able to answer it off the top of my head.
Okay, and you could submit that as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned in your opening remarks that companies are not willing to come into Canada here and invest into Canada. Why not? Can you expand on that a little bit?
I indicated that Canadian SMEs may not be able or capable of investing into deep tech. I think there are companies from the US and elsewhere who wish to benefit from our innovation pipeline because our own local businesses are unable to capitalize on it. The reason why our local businesses are unable to capitalize on it is primarily, first of all, they don't have a very large presence in the high-tech space. You don't have something like an Apple or Google or Facebook or Intel that is such a large enterprise and has so much revenue that they have a very rich research focus. We don't have that in Canada. We have smaller and medium enterprises where most of the day-to-day activity focuses on product development and sales and commercialization of existing technology and maybe incremental innovation. You don't see a lot of people taking a lot of risk. So that's why I would suspect why we don't do too well on the new deep tech front.
Okay. Do you know much about as far as even the investment atmosphere, United States versus Canada or anywhere else in the country? Do you know of certain regulations or certain tax code, something that's standing in the way of that, like where someone would take on that extra cost if government could get out of the way, or some regulations, legislation could get out of the way that we could look at on this study?
No, that's a great question. I'm not aware. I do have personal experience again in this space, but I'm not aware of any tax limitation on why somebody from the US would not invest in Canada. That being said, there is a preference for American investors to try and invest in the United States, potentially because there are states that have very favorable labor laws and very favorable acquisition laws. So oftentimes when an American company or American investor wants to come in Canada, they will advise the Canadian company to set up a US Delaware office. So I'm aware of that. But I don't believe there is anything fundamental, at least off the top of my head, that would prevent an American company from directly investing in Canada other than just an intrinsic fear of the unknown.
Okay. This is for both of you. I'm going to quote a report from the Institute for Research and Public Policy. The majority of patents filed by research teams with at least one Canadian inventor are assigned on the date of issue to firms outside of Canada or to foreign subsidiaries in Canada. And of the patents that are assigned to Canadian residents, a significant portion of the subsequently sold to foreign entities. End quote. It is my understanding that around 50% of Canadian invented patents are transferred to foreign firms. Can you explain why this is happening, and how can we keep IP in Canada? Because I think my colleague, Mr. Williams, has commented on this before. Like, if we can keep that technology and that IP in Canada, that's more generation. Oh, sorry. I didn't realize I was out of time. I went fast.
20 seconds over right now,
Okay.
so we're going to have to ask for a written response. Once again, I do not like to cut off witnesses, but MPs need to manage their time. Moving on to the next 5-minute panel, or round of questioning, we have Madam Radford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to both of our witnesses today. You bring very interesting and different perspectives to this important discussion, so I thank you both for being here. Being from the Waterloo region, I will be directing my questions to Professor Krim. And also, I just wanted to refer to MP Williams' earlier questions with respect to venture capital or whatever. We have invited Chris Albinson, the CEO and president of Communitech, to be a future witness. I just did a roundtable recently. He has all those answers for you. So I'm going to focus on IP, but I really hope he's able to come, because there is a lot of information there about venture capital, how it's working, and all those things. So now, looking at the IP perspective, I wonder, Professor Krim, could you maybe comment on how the newly announced Elevate IP program helps address some of the challenges facing IP right now, so that, is funding these hubs from across the country. I'm glad that they, go from out west down to Halifax as well, and how that's going to help companies ramp up, because, the challenges are always kind of in the ramping up process, it seems, not in the starting up process.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Bradford. The government's announced money for this Elevate IP program, and the Elevate IP is supposed to help business accelerators and incubators get the tools to Canadian startups to understand and manage and leverage their IP. That's the purported reason for the creation of the Elevate IP program. As such, universities are perhaps not as closely involved as potentially business accelerators and incubators might be. The money is being provided to help startups understand, manage, and leverage their IP. From a startup perspective, one of the biggest challenges is, well, we all know that IP is important. The question is, how do we pay for it? Because IP is inexpensive. This program is helping us understand and manage the IP from a startup perspective, but I don't know if it's going to enable us to pay for IP. When you think about a startup, a typical startup might raise anywhere from $300,000 to $1 million in its first few years of operation. If I talk about how much it costs to file a US patent, from filing to issuance, you're looking at anywhere from $25,000 to $30,000. That can add up very quickly and becomes a very significant portion of the startup's costs. So I think it's a good program, but I don't know if the goals that it's purporting to meet will actually be met. I think I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you. So on the university's website, there is a bit of a warning message there. It says, in an academic environment, it's common that IP creators might be involved in presenting their research at conferences or publishing in journalism or thesis defense proceedings, or having preliminary discussions with potential research funding partners. All of these activities could present public disclosure that, if not carefully managed, could restrict your ability to secure broad patent protection. So in the academic context, is there a tension between the movement for open science and the push for protection and commercialization of IP?
Again, a fantastic question, MP Bradford. Absolutely, there's a tension, but you have to learn to manage the tension. And so, in general, at Waterloo, I can say that we educate our researchers on the importance of IP and the importance of having this discussion with the University Tech Transfer Office in advance of publication. Should those researchers reach out to us, we immediately file the IP, and it's relatively inexpensive to file a provisional because, and it buys you a full year to file the full patent. In that gap, the IP is protected, and the researchers can then publish without the same concerns that were noted before. But there is definitely a piece there on education for people to know that this is important.
And are there areas where Canada is excelling in IP commercialization and areas where we need to support better, such as in academia or certain business sectors? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I would say Canadian pharmaceutical IP, from what I understand, does quite well. Unfortunately, we don't have a very large pharmaceutical company within Canada to truly reap the benefits. But from an IP perspective, we generate a lot of IP in the pharma space. We also generate a fair bit of IP in the tech space. On the tech side, we are doing reasonably well, I would say, with startups, especially our high-tech startups. For example, from Waterloo, like Velocity I mentioned, have created $35 billion of enterprise value over the last 15 years, which is quite staggering to say it's come from just one little region. So yes, I think there are some bright sparks. I would, if someone was to say, well, what should we be focusing on? I would say we should be focusing on growing our startup ecosystems. And startups, I think, offer us the best chance to create these large behemoths that can compete on the international stage with other countries.
And Velocity knows how to turn them out. Thank you so much.
Now on to our 2.5-minute round, and we have MP Blanchette.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je retourne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have more questions for Ms. Beaugé. Ms. Beaugé, earlier we talked about Canada's difficulty in stimulating private sector investment. I can give you some factual data. To improve, we have to have a portrait of the situation. We have to recognize it. But you understand, not everybody recognizes this situation. So, among OECD countries in 2019, Canada was ranked 24th for private sector investment in R&D. So, 24 out of 37. I'd like you to share the explanation for this low rate of productivity by Canada. Well, thank you for the question. I could discuss the pharmaceutical industry in particular. As we said, unfortunately, we're relatively limited in this country when it comes to the capacity of pharmaceutical companies that are established in Canada because they're really focused on marketing and product sales and not R&D. So that greatly limits potential investments. Ms. Beaugé, I'll interrupt you here because my time is short. I'd like to get to the next question that is linked. Quebec, particularly Montreal, was for a long time a hub of the pharmaceutical industry in the world. We can name these companies: Merck, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Ingeline, GlaxoSmithKline. These are all companies that were present on Quebec soil in the 2000s. You were CEO of Iricor for almost 7 years. These companies didn't shut down in Quebec because it was too cold in winter. What are the reasons that explain that these companies left Quebec and Canada? And what explains why Canada was the only G7 country, once again, to not produce a COVID vaccine? Well, I'll answer quickly the first part of your question. They were tax incentives. I think there's room for improvement there to improve tax incentives for pharmaceutical companies. But I think we were very innovative as well in capturing human capital from those companies because, as I mentioned, and you mentioned as well, many closed their doors here. But the people who had been trained in those companies ended up in the entire academic ecosystem and mainly the Drug Discovery Institute of IRIC, which contains or includes 70 people who are highly qualified who came from those pharmaceutical companies and who are helping develop academic research to make it value added. Thank you very much, Ms. Beaugé.
Our final 2.5-minute round, MP Cannings.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to follow up on that line of questioning, but I'll turn to Professor Karim on it, to talking about pharmaceutical companies, and you talked about societal challenges that the private sector is often reluctant to get into and the government role there. Just wondering, is there a possible role for, we used to have Connaught Labs, for instance, that produced vaccines and other pharmaceutical products as a Crown Corporation. Is there a role for Crown Corporations in this space that would keep not only the production of pharmaceuticals in Canada, but also the IP? We've heard a lot about, encouraging companies to develop the IP, but it seems to, has been said, leave the country fairly quickly. Is there a role for the government to produce Crown Corporations that would do this and keep that in Canada?
So I think there's absolutely a role for government to support infrastructure, be it Crown Corporation or otherwise, for what could be termed essential industries for a country. Vaccines, to me, appears to be one such essential industry. So I would imagine that this should be a high priority. Because if there is another pandemic, we may be in the same situation. I think there are other essential industries as well. For example, across medical, we don't have a very large medical device ecosystem in Canada either. We typically tend to buy all our equipment from the US or elsewhere. And during the pandemic, we also felt acute shortages, for example, on ventilators and simple X-ray equipment. So absolutely, this is something that should be part of a wider discussion of what is a critical industry and infrastructure for Canada, and then how should we go about looking at investing, be it through a Crown Corporation or some other similar mechanism to ensure that we have access.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the testimony from our witnesses and from our insightful questions from members of Parliament. We now will just break as we get the second panel up and running. right. Carrying on in our study about commercialization of IP in Canada, we have our next panel of witnesses. Each witness will have 5 minutes opening remarks. Please do your best to keep it to 5 minutes. I'll try to get your attention when you're coming close to it. First off, for 5 minutes is Professor D'Agostino.
Okay. Bonjour tout le monde. Me to be here. My name is Pina D'Agostino, and I'm a law professor at Osgoode Hall Law School, York University, for the last 17 years, specializing in IP, emerging tech, and innovation law and policy. I have researched, published, taught, advised multiple levels of government, have been cited by our Supreme Court of Canada, and I felt passionate enough about these issues that 13 years ago I founded the first pro bono legal clinic of its kind in Canada, the IP Innovation Clinic, where I have subsidized over $2 million in legal fees that would have otherwise been billable to help disenfranchised entrepreneurs start up their businesses, leading to many success stories and job creation in Canada. Now, beyond academia, I have experience as a corporate lawyer working with entrepreneurs and serve on the board of directors of Ontario's homegrown Electra, the second largest municipally owned energy distribution company in North America. I have observed many of the challenges Canadian businesses face and the crucial role that IP plays and should play in the commercialization process. And here I also note the crucial role of data. We have a blossoming talent and creativity in Canada. Canada boasts a proven track record across all areas of science and tech with leading Nobels, industries, and more recently in artificial intelligence. Now, to learn from history, Banting and Best discovered insulin in Ontario, but this life-saving compound was not commercialized here, and today it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. This was a missed opportunity not to be repeated. We can and should be doing so much better. IP is frequently not properly diagnosed, protected, and exploited. A serious challenge lies in the commercialization of this talent and creativity. From an IP perspective, developing IP strategies at every level, from nascent to enterprise companies, is key. IP is the new global currency to foster innovation. All too often, without the security of IP protection, investors will not spend the money to build businesses and make the local talent blossom. Here we face various challenges and opportunities, and I note just some. One, universities are the hub of innovation and are well poised to solve today's big problems. But most academics are not trained entrepreneurs. They need to be educated about IP and require expert support from day zero. The average research-intensive university is trying its very best with its scant resources, but remains under-resourced and is left with siloed institutional approaches. 2, tech transfer personnel are the gatekeepers, but often have limited industrial experience and knowledge in IP and lack the financial resources to support IP. Either they don't adequately recognize that there's valuable IP to be protected when a scientist says, "Eureka," or they protect the invention by filing a patent, but then, because of institutional policies and financial constraints, mandate that in order for the patent to keep progressing, a licensing deal needs to be in place within a year. This results in missed opportunities. In biomedical science, for instance, stem cells, another groundbreaking Canadian invention, has the added burden of conducting preclinical studies for proof of principle. This arbitrary one-year deadline means that valuable patents can be dropped too early. This can all be fixed by changing an institution's practices and investing in commercialization. Note, however, that there is no one-size-fits-all solution, since for other sectors, a one-year policy might suffice, for instance, in the case of software. We thus need a sector-specific institutional approach. What is the best IP strategy per sector, per innovation, is what we need to ask. And of course, hiring the most qualified tech transfer personnel and making investments and paying for the brightest minds can go a long way. In Ontario, the provincial government's IPON has recently put out a call to assist at the tech transfer level. More such help is needed. 3, we must be committed to a made-in-Canada solution. We need a cultural shift and be more risk-takers while at the same time having a longer-term business plan. This means not seeking the fastest route once the IP is secured and offloading it. This comes at a cost since the IP and the future IP, the follow-on IP, likely ends up in the US. Insulin is a case in point. And in closing, and here, as tempting as it is for me as a lawyer to say that we need to change the law, to make commercialization a success, we need the entire socioeconomic system to have attention. And this is why I applaud you today for convening this study. Again, we need a sector-specific approach, starting with inculcating and rewarding a culture of innovation, embedding sound institutional policies and practices at every level, and fostering a society that is more inclusive and attuned to underrepresented communities, sidelined by the innovation ecosystem for far too long. And here, two communities that my work is concerned with are women and Indigenous communities. I thank you for your time and look forward to your comments and questions. Merci.
Thank you so much for that. Now on to our second witness, Mr. Granville, online.
Bonjour et merci.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having invited me to speak to your committee. I'm representing IPIC, the Intellectual Property Institute of Canada. To give you some context, I'm a private practice lawyer. I'm also an engineer. I've been working in this field for about 25 years. IPIC has been working for many years with ISDE and CIPO to promote IP, to educate the public on the importance of IP, and having an IP strategy anchored in a company's business strategy and on the implementation of IP incentives in general. When it comes to education, our members are involved in hundreds of hundreds of hours of work in chambers of commerce, universities, and so on. Among many initiatives tabled in May, we tabled a brief about the same topic that is before the committee today. There were two major issues that happened apart from the pandemic. In 2018, the government launched its intellectual property strategy. This should be celebrated for what it produced by modernizing the regulatory framework and by establishing an innovation collective. A recent decision by the federal court on Sandoz has handicapped Canadian companies considerably. In this case, the client-agent privilege or confidentiality of information that is shared was examined, and the court had a very restrictive interpretation of the Patent Act. The situation today is worse than what we had before legislation was introduced. The government must take action through legislation to reset the situation and make sure that companies that have agents can retain this confidentiality. Here we're talking about commercialization of intellectual property, but a few questions arise first. To circumscribe the scope of the issue before the committee, who is responsible for commercialization? What are we talking about here in terms of IP? How is it protected? In answering these questions, we have to look at what the challenges are in commercialization of IP. The first challenge is the fact that small businesses and large ones don't always understand IP. The government implemented its strategy in 2018. It was a major initiative. More recently, LVPI and another program were implemented, but it's too soon to evaluate their impact, even though at first glance it seems very positive. Nevertheless, certain programs to finance R&D don't have a commercialization aspect. For example, the government scientific SR&ED credits, as we commonly call them, do not include any conditions or any obligation to protect the fruits of research or transform them into products or services that can be commercialized. This is an investment of $3.5 billion in 2022. This initial challenge means that a lot of companies have trouble identifying the IP and can't commercialize it adequately because they risk not being adequately protected. The second challenge is the time aspect between the crystallization of an IP and its evolution into a marketable object or service. Having been able to protect an innovation does not automatically mean that it is ready to be commercialized. Many patent-protected innovations never see a shelf in a store or an entry on a website. The reasons for this mismatch between IP and commercialization are varied and not quite ready. Market, a lack of funds, features not adapted to the commercial needs of potential customers, and many others. Sustained support is desirable. The third challenge is related to the existence of IP held by third parties, which could prevent the free manufacture and sale of the innovation. This challenge, while real, must be preceded by a much better use of IP by innovative companies in order to create IP assets that can attract value and serve as a counterbalance to a present or apprehended dispute. The former witnesses and members of the committee talked about basic research within universities. Moreover, our 2017 brief offered several avenues of reflection to mitigate this problem. Organizations such as Axilis, a new technological transfer organization in Quebec, are actively working on the development of programs, strategies, and incentives to make researchers aware of the importance of IP and the importance of protecting this IP, sometimes at the risk of delaying the publication of the research results. This is a complex issue that requires a profound cultural change within the academic community. A one-size-fits-all approach will not serve everyone's needs. Differences between institutions, regions, and even between scientific fields will require flexibility and adaptability. Now, that said, one important gap is the lack of trained technology.
Here we are over a minute long there.
Sorry.
A lot of great information there, and I'm sure you'll be able to unpack more of it once we get into the Q's and A's.
Excellent. Thank you.
No worries. Starting from the Conservatives, Dan Mazur for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming out here today. Ms. D'Agostino, you mentioned the term university gatekeepers when discussing concerns with patent applications being dropped too early by universities. And you stated, and I quote, "This does not bode well for Canada's innovation economy." Can you expand on that or explain that?
For sure. So when that scientist says eureka, the first place they'll look to is their tech transfer office, usually their innovation office within the university. And there's certain personnel who are hired to work alongside the inventor to help file, protect the patent. Now, it depends on what I talked about in the one instance with stem cells. So sometimes you have personnel there who don't have the deep experience and expertise within that particular sector to even understand the technology. So that already is a first barrier of limitations. There's also financial constraints within that office. So they're very, and here it would be good also to speak directly with a tech transfer. I see the follow-on effects when they come to me, is that it's challenging to then, let's say they do file the patent, for it to keep progressing. The tech transfer office is hungry and worried and wants to ensure that they've put their bet on a winning patent, right? So they want to see, where are your licensing deals? What's going on with this technology? How are things going? And sometimes what will happen is that that the tech transfer office will say, we can't follow on with your patent. And that, to me, is a missed opportunity because, and the previous witness just talked about this, is there's a time gap. It depends on the technology. In the case of the biomedical sciences, you just need a little bit more time and some more money to get things done. And this is not the case with other technologies. So that's why one of my recommendations is that we need to really look at the tech and have a sector-specific approach and ensure that tech transfer offices are properly staffed with knowledgeable personnel. They're properly compensated, and they also have an understanding and patience to walk the inventors through their patents. So, and that is they're at the nascent level because they're the gatekeepers. Because if they don't make it out of the patent off within the university, they're done. And that's something that we lose in our innovation ecosystem. So I think it's so crucial, and that's why I rolled up my own sleeves to help within the university, because I saw that this was happening and to do my part to ensure that it doesn't. And now my hope is working directly with Innovation York at York University, the IP clinic, and it is supported by Innovation York. So we work together, and this is also avoiding that siloing that I talked about that we see happening. And I'm just talking about York. I've seen it happen across other universities as well.
Thank you. You mentioned IP protection. How big of an issue is theft of intellectual property to commercialization in Canada?
By theft, I imagine you mean patent infringement, copyright infringement. Well, that's in a sense almost another study that we could convene on this, because it's looking at Canada, as many of you know, is always on a watch list in a sense, because we tend to, I imagine, have a more perhaps progressive policy in terms of the IP as opposed to other countries. And so sometimes you do see infringements taking place. In my view, when it comes to commercialization, though, I think we need to focus on the startup stage and like what IPs are getting filed and how they're protected, and to have a business and IP strategy in place to ensure that there is that commercialization that is kept in-house in Canada.
So under our existing system right now, we have some holes that need to be addressed, but how much of this intellectual property would be considered stolen? How much do you think is actually just outright stolen?
By Canadians stealing IP? I
no,
wouldn't.
or other entities. Like, is there some big offenders of no one's stealing of IP?
I don't. Yeah.
Either companies, nothing. Like, there's no shenanigans going on as far as
none that I could speak about. I guess that have come to my attention that I know that I could talk about. No.
Okay. Are there any G7 countries that we could learn from when it comes to cracking down on IP theft?
So, I mean, I'm looking at it more through the lens of commercialization. And so some countries that I love to look at is Germany as one country. Germany has a very strong entrepreneurship ecosystem. So their innovation is very good within industries, because what they have is typically an inventor-centric approach. So that within companies, employees are incented to invent because they know that they're going to have some stake in it. So that also incites the manufacturing industry to be more vibrant. So I think Germany is a nice, country to look at.
That is, thank you for that. I know my time's close, but that's the second time we've heard about Germany. So thank you for those comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Moving on to MP Solsa for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both witnesses for your presentations. Ms. Agostino, congratulations on your accomplishments and your expertise. I appreciate what you've had to say. My first round of questions to you, and then I'm going to go to Monsieur Gravel. So we talked about scaling, bringing the venture to market. We talk a lot about IP and the commercialization of it, and I understand how critical it is. We just mentioned recently about the notion of that 1-year deadline, which it's concerning. But put yourself now in the context of the government. So members of the Parliament are going to say, "Where's the money being invested, and how come it's failing?" Right? Because that's the criticism, and then that so-called gatekeeper is there to protect the taxpayer. And the taxpayer is saying, we don't want our money invested in ventures that we don't have security or any confidence of success. But that's your point. We're trying to ensure we do as many as possible to get that 1 or 2 big hits, right? So it's a problem. And when you look at and explain to us, when I hear this thing about theft versus sale, and what I'm trying to suggest is we let go of our IP early in the stage because we're looking for that capital and for that tolerance or appetite to invest long term. Hence, they go to private investors elsewhere because in Canada we don't seem to have the socioeconomic desire. And if I look at Nortel, for example, during their wind-up, all the assets, all the value, even though it was Canadian made, were held in their IPs in the U.S. And we lost a lot of potential to provide for some of those jobs and some of those pensioners. They were lost to the IP that was held elsewhere because they took on that market took on that risk. How do you then, you've given us a few recommendations. University hubs should be more entrepreneurial. That's awesome. I love that to see the case, but how do you encourage that? How do you encourage that tech personnel to look at the sectors more specifically as opposed to being short-term, be more long-term? And bottom line, when you look at the culture, that whole appetite, you've been at this a long time. We've been talking about the same issue for a while. And if I look at some of the other Canadian pension companies that have those offshoots, they're looking at nurturing this more so than government. Now, the government's involved, but someone has to assume that risk. How do you encourage that?
So that's a great question, and I think that sort of encapsulates a lot of the points I've been making. So from a government perspective, your role is really to set the tone for the country. You set the vision, the policies, and it's really, we say tone at the top. And I'm heartened, at least within Canada, and this study is a case in point, that the tone is a vibrant and dynamic and very uplifting one in commercialization right now. Because I can't remember the amount of times I would wait for budget and wait to even hear the word IP, right? And, until the last 5-6 years, there's been a flurry of activity within the government. And we've seen this not only within the government of Canada, but at multiple levels. So within Ontario is a case in point, and then municipally. So this to me is heartening because all of this has that visionary effect, right? But then what we need is also that to match at the grassroots level.
Yeah, good point. So I'm going to go over to Mr. Gravel. Mr. Gravel, should government be venture capitalists?
That's a billion-dollar question, isn't it?
That's what's being made before us. And some of the suggestions that are being made by our witnesses is, yeah, we should expand some of our dollars, some of our taxpayer dollars, to somewhat adjudicate some of these deals. And you've mentioned it too. So one size doesn't fit all. And our SMEs and some of our business don't understand it fully. And I agree with you. Question is, following up with Ms. Agostino, how do we encourage all parties in government to allow government to be a bit more of a risk taker?
I don't know that government needs to be more of a risk taker than it already is. The government does have programs funded through the BDC where it does assume some of the risk related to deep tech and other IP-heavy companies. What I do think, however, and I think you've alluded to it in your comments, is that we have a behavior problem. And if the Canadian government wants to change the behavior of the actors, then the Canadian government should be looking at incentives that will effectively change that behavior. In respect of the lack of personnel or lack of qualified personnel within the TTOs, the tech transfer offices, the government did have a program about 20 years ago where they would fund part of the salary of those people who are experts in tech transfer, experts in intellectual property, and allow the TTOs to have more staff. That program was cut about 20 years ago. Maybe that's a good idea to revisit that, because that way you're subsidizing or you're helping the TTOs spread the knowledge more effectively, and you're building expertise within the TTOs so that you can have more effective tech transfer out of the universities into the hands of entrepreneurs that can then take that IP and bring it to market.
I appreciate that. My time is run out, but thank you both.
Now, moving on to our third round of questions from MP Blanchette for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish to welcome the witnesses. Mr. Gravel is very pleased to see you again and welcome you to this important committee whose study is about intellectual property. Mr. Gravel, in your speech, you did illustrate the situation. You listed a few solutions, too. I familiarized myself with the pre-budget recommendations of 2022, 2023's to come. You said that the government should implement a first patent program. That's something that existed in Quebec but was abolished since. It allowed coverage of initial research, strategy for intellectual property, a draft patent application. Could you discuss the importance of having that program again? I think the importance is to change behavior. What we see generally, and studies that were conducted by CIPO and StatsCan reveal this, Canadian companies underutilize intellectual property assets in general, especially patents. The fact of offering a subsidy for an established company, we're not talking about startups here, we're not talking about emerging companies from universities, but established companies that never concern themselves with IP, giving them an incentive to do so will change behavior. What we're seeing is the first patent is an extraordinary step. That's very well. But in order to build a portfolio of IP, you have to have more than one patent. Often it's the second, the third, or fourth that adds a great deal of value to the final IP. Establishing a program like that changes people's behavior. Once behavior starts to change, it becomes easier to encourage the use of these IP tools. In your opinion, is Canada's IP environment robust enough and well-tooled enough to encourage researchers to develop their products? I think good steps have already been taken, but a great deal remains to be done. When we're talking about tools, programs like VPE or IP Assist, which were just launched recently, are good starting points. I was talking about R&D tax credits earlier. I think that is a missed opportunity. It doesn't encourage companies to change their behavior. If we don't impose in some way at least an obligation to look at the issue of IP in the framework of the work being done, once IP has been identified, commercialize it. I think the other tool that I discussed a little earlier in my opening remarks was to solve the problem that we have today about privilege or confidentiality of exchanges between patent agents and their clients. That has to be settled because that cannot continue. Thank you, Mr. Gravel. You also talked about tax credits and incentives for commercialization and to help innovation. Quebec had established an incentive deduction, once again, for innovation and commercialization since 2021. That's an incentive that meant that all profits from an IP asset were targeted by the program and had a 2% taxation rate rather than 11%. So that, of course, encourages companies to innovate in order to reduce their tax burden. Do you think that there is an equivalent at the federal level? Would that be useful? Well, absolutely. That should be implemented. It would be useful. And we've been promoting a measure like that for many years. The advantage of that kind of incentive is something that has to come before. It's like a patent box, as we say in English. The assets have to exist. They have to be delivered in jurisdictions where we want to encourage commercialization. That usually happens quite a long time after the original patent application and the creation of the innovation or the arrival of that innovation. But once again, that's a measure that has to be part of a continuum of measures that truly allow companies to focus on innovation, to protect that innovation and the various forms of intellectual property, and then commercialize it adequately for the benefit of Canadian companies. Thank you, Mr. Gravel. You talked about the underutilization of commercialization. That's not very well known. The tools aren't very well known. Mr. Mike McLean of another organization came to our last meeting and said that the national strategy on IP by the federal government was misunderstood, not well known. Could you tell us more? How could the federal government inform those who are targeted by those measures and link that up to intellectual property and make sure there's better use of it? How do we reach them? Once again,
we only allowed him 6 seconds to reply or to answer, and I know that that's not enough time to give a fulsome answer. So you would please.
I would ask for a written answer to my question then. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, we'll have a written question or answer to that question. Now moving on to the final 6-minute spot, MP Cannings.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to turn to Professor D'Agostino with a number of questions because you said a lot there and I missed some of the details. At the end, you said something about we need to change the law, and I'm just wondering if you could expand on that. What and why?
Yeah, for sure. So I said, as tempting as it is for me to say we need to change the law, I don't think
you don't.
That wouldn't be my sense of urgency.
Okay.
Wouldn't be there.
Okay.
My sense of urgency is more looking at the entire socioeconomic system, because with the law, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, the law has to be clear. If that is clear to the different stakeholders, the venture capitalists, the inventors, that's all we want. If you look at Canada within the universities, we have a patchwork system. So York has an inventor-centric policy, but other universities have a university-centric policy. As long as there's an awareness of what those policies are, and that gives life to that context-specific approach, I think we're okay.
And I think in that context, you were talking about women and Indigenous participants in this process, and you said that you were helping disenfranchised entrepreneurs. I just wanted to give you a chance to expand on what you've been doing and what the results have been and what we need to do to encourage
For sure.
that.
Thank you so much for raising that. So to me, the underrepresented communities, women and Indigenous peoples, are the have-nots of the IP system. They're the have-nots of the patents. So when we think about having a dynamic commercialization process and a system and the results for the benefits of all Canadians, they're actually not at the table because they're not the owners of the IP. They're not filing the IP. And the these figures are well documented. The Canadian Intellectual Property Office here, the USPTO, the World Intellectual Property Organization all have studies on this. And I gave a presentation to Indigenous Services Canada just last year, tabulating some of these numbers, and it's pretty sad. So on the heels of International Women's Day, to see that women own only 16% of patents, like that is a sad day in 2023. So we need to do better. And so how I'm doing my part in a sense, and this is in many ways response from the federal government. The federal government itself identified women and Indigenous communities as two communities that need assistance. And they've done this through their programming. And I was the beneficiary of that through one of the proposals I put through and my IP innovation chatbot, which is a way to automate the commercialization process to be more responsive of women and Indigenous peoples that often don't have the resources, even more than just mainstream ecosystems, to ask the questions and to get the answers. So that's just one of the tools that I've done through the clinic. And then as an example, one of the exciting startups that I helped with through the clinic is Indigenous Friends. And they were essentially grad students from York University that felt very alienated. And they came up with this technology and a smart app, which was then funded from the provincial government and now is being rolled out across Canada. So that's just one instance. Ella is another group within York University that is looking specifically to women and trying to help them in their commercialization success. So there's many different examples here, but one thing that I would encourage this committee to look at is to avoid the siloing. So there's a lot of money, a lot of programming that is being deployed to help lift these communities, but we really need a heat map and to find out what is being done and to have accountability, transparency, and to line up the success stories and to connect the dots. Because what we want to avoid at all costs is siloing. I see it within the institution, and it can happen within Canada. It within the provinces and the municipalities. We all need to work together.
If I would just ask if there's a way to get the report that you mentioned and held up as part of the testimony, that would be great. And just finally, you mentioned Electra.
Yes.
And that's some sort of municipal crown corporation, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a energy distribution company.
And so I'm just wondering if you could comment on the role that agencies like that might play.
Yes, for sure. And I love working I serve on the board of directors of Electra, and I also teach business associations and entrepreneurship. So to me, it's a constellation of all of these. Within Electra itself and many other companies across Canada, they are only now, in a sense, realizing that in order to be competitive, they need to keep innovating. So within Electra itself, you also see how the company itself is changing, and we're blessed there to have a visionary CEO who gets it and is able to inculcate that culture of innovation, which I think needs to happen across industry. And I'm happy to see that within Electra, and then Electra is also working to work more closely with universities and to work more closely with the technology that's coming out of the universities.
Apparently,
you have 16 seconds left, Mr. Keyes.
Thank you for your questions.
Moving on to the next round of questions for 5 minutes, we have Mr. Williams.
Chair, Ms. D'Agostino, thank you for being here today. I loved your analogy in the beginning with Dr. Best and Dr. Banting, of course, for insulin. I'm from Belleville, Ontario, and we had Dr. Collip. And Dr. Collip, I think, is the best analogy for Canada. He was the unsung hero. He actually was one of the co-inventors of insulin, played a major role, but no one really knew about him. I think that's kind of like how Canada is, that we play a major role in developing IP, having institutions, major research, applied research, but we just have this problem of not being able to keep. We're helping other countries a lot of times. And so I really want to focus on your expertise in legal and IP law. Are there aspects of Canadian IP law which are holding our innovators back compared to other Western nations? And so how can we change them?
Great question. And just to go back to the insulin example, one way to change them is to really look to see from a legal perspective what actually happened in that case. So the inventors, Banting and Best, actually assigned their patent to the University of Toronto for $1. $1. Yeah. So that then ignited the ability for anybody, right, to come and practice the patent. And so what happened there is that the U.S., having the more robust manufacturing market and really appetite for risk, took it on, and 100 years ago started building capacity, and there's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So from a legal perspective, what we want to avoid, and then I should mention along the way, filing follow-on IP. Once the patent expired, right, they were able to then lock it up and then commercialize because then they owned it. So that's how that is something that we missed out on. So what we want to ensure, and the earlier Mr. Gravel talked about this, is like that, follow-on IP, and something that I also mentioned in my opening. And so what we want to ensure is to have that arsenal, that portfolio of IP. From a legal perspective, we can't give it away. We need to ensure that we're strategic in the way that we keep it, license it, commercialize it? If we want to give it away, let's get money for it. Or does it make sense to keep it, depending on what also the business strategy is? Because it could be an innovation, and I'm thinking about Electra, for instance, that is sort of not germane to the business model.
I'm going to drill down to
Yes.
three aspects
Yes.
that I've identified. I don't want to see what your opinion on this. One is patent backlog. So it's not just passports, it's also patents. So it seems like there's a significant backlog in processing patent applications in Canada. There seems to be a lack of clarity that I've seen in some of our IP law on patentable subject matter, and then limited patent terms. So you mentioned there's an expiry. It seems that 20 years seems to be the maximum. So on those three aspects, what would you say to each of those?
I think there's hope. Okay, because we, on the backlog issue, I know SIPO and, Konstantinos Georgaras at the helm there. I have high hopes with his work, and I've seen what he's done. And he's looking really to innovate also within SIPO. So, and I know that some, positive changes are being made. There's new strategic plan. There's technology, right, that AI, I mentioned it earlier, that will come in and also expedite, automate a lot of the looking at these patents, right?
I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I hate these 5 minutes, and
Yeah.
there's so much time. And all of that, too. And if you have anything else to that, please submit those in writing. The U.S. also used something that's really interesting to me, patent assertion. So lawsuits in order to maintain IP, they use it extensively, and I think it's one of their successes. Is that something we're seeing in Canada, and is that something you would ever recommend as a recommendation for Canadian companies?
Well, when you own something, you need to protect it. And so if you need to sue based on that, then of course, putting my legal hat on, I would say yes. But there, what happens, and I think we need to avoid that because it would cause access to justice issues, litigation, and more backlog in the process, is to make sure that the technology is properly protected to begin with, that we have sufficient and proper patents around the tech. Sometimes it's not just one tech because the claim construction process is key. So this is where, going back to the TTOs, you need smart people there working alongside lawyers, ensuring that we have a strong foundation of patenting. Because if you get it right at a nascent stage, you can avoid the follow-on litigation. Litigation will always happen in some ways, but you will diminish that.
Is there a quick recommendation you can make that to protect IP and with Canadian IP law?
To protect IP,
Yeah.
Well, we need to file patents and have IP strategies.
Thank you so much. Now moving on to the last of the 5-minute round, we have MP Collins, who's online.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the witnesses. I'd like to start with Professor D'Agostino. As a longtime city councillor in Hamilton, my familiarity with innovation and universities is McMaster University and their McMaster's Innovation Park. And I've had a number of opportunities over the years to visit Dr. Ali Ahmadi's Next Gen project, where he's working on AI, which I know you're very familiar with all the work that you do at York University. Their work on electrified vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and much of the innovation there at McMaster is driven by 3 levels of government. So you're the first witness that's referenced that to date. I know we're early in the study. But Mac Innovation Park, supported by the municipal government in terms of purchasing the lands that the property sits on, provincial and federal governments invested in the bricks and mortar. And then, as I questioned Dr. Ahmadi and the students, much of the operating dollars come from the private sector. And so they've been able to leverage, in that instance, millions of dollars from the automotive industry and associate stakeholders with the industry. And so my question to them was, how does the federal government, how do we get double or triple of investment as to what they're getting today? How do we create an environment there at Max Innovation Park? And I'm assuming the same would hold true at York and Waterloo and others across the country. How does the federal government assist in that regard in terms of just driving innovation? And you referenced that, I think, in your first point. And then my second question to that is, how do we assist in terms of finding those private partners for them. And so for some, I think it's probably an easy task. For others, it's probably much more difficult if it's social innovation. So can I ask you those two questions to start?
Yeah, that's a beautiful example of really a multi-sectoral, multi-pronged approach to innovation where you have different partners coming together. And we see that even within York. Now, the government's role there is to ensure, you mentioned how do we bring in industry? Well, that happens at every level. As a government, you have line of sight of who the key players are, but you may miss those smaller players at the grassroots level. And that's where it is key to have the different hubs, so like the clinics, the TTOs, the municipalities who are aware of their local industry and work together. And I mentioned a heat map, but we need more connectedness because working together, we can also avoid duplication and be more efficient and really innovate with intention. And one of the earlier, I think a few days ago, talked about, this clustering approach. So we need to cluster around technologies and sectors and build that critical mass. And so AI is, in my view, something that we need to really rally behind here in Canada. And we've seen this happening now with the government. Again, I'm encouraged by what we see in Canada. We have AIDA before Parliament right now, so you have the policy that is getting promulgated. You have the startups. I read somewhere that we have more startups mushrooming across Canada than anywhere else on the AI front. You have the researchers, and I'll put myself in that camp, that are staying up at night thinking of what we're going to do with ChatGPT and how we're going to keep innovating. So we have that within Canada.
Thanks for those answers. I would ask as a subsequent follow-up question, as it relates to the, again, you were the first witness to reference women in Indigenous communities. I had the opportunity to visit McMaster again 2 weeks ago. We made an investment in the aerospace industry there, 300 plus positions that will be supported from a training perspective, 100 of which will be Indigenous. So my question to you is, I'm assuming you've mentioned earlier that you've been an applicant to government applications. How do those applications need to change as it relates to supporting women in Indigenous communities, or with what you've seen recently, do those applications appropriately or properly reflect our desire to support women and Indigenous communities across the country?
Another great question. So I've actually had the privilege to also serve on SSHRC adjudication panels, and I know that the government takes it very seriously to ensure that the best and the brightest minds in this country are, rewarded from their applications. But even there, and now at every stage, you see more and more in the asks, a more mindfulness to ensuring that women and Indigenous communities are represented. And so what I would say is that in the actual applications, there needs to be, you need to ensure that the parameters when you're setting up a fund or putting a program together, that you have a mention that they need to be as diverse, equitable, and inclusive as possible, and then to ensure that those who are adjudicating, because then it's the follow-on effect, are also qualified to do so. And then there's also the accountability of it, because sometimes, and I've seen applications where you just name drop or put something, but there's no real track record of relationship between those Indigenous communities. That doesn't go well. So you need to ensure that there's authenticity in every application, and that the follow-on, there's transparency and accountability for what they actually produce in the end. I think we need to do better in having accountability of every dollar that is spent and what we do with it and where it ends up. Because I think
Professor,
also...
Thank you so much.
Would you
We
recommend
are out of time, Mr. Collins.
audit?
Appreciate
Okay,
that.
sorry, Mr. Chair.
Moving on to Mr. Blanchette for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to address Mr. Gravel. We're getting back to IP. In research, we're talking about the importance of open data, access to knowledge, in order to make science-based decisions based on probative facts. Could you share from your standpoint and your expertise, whether that reality could be reconciled with the imperatives of protecting IP for the well-being of all. I think so. There are some countries that are examining sui generis protection for data, not raw data, but the way the data is agglomerated, refined, cleaned up in order to allow for better use. It is possible that this is a solution that the government might want to look at in order to give greater value to data that has been acquired in Canada and that can then be used for AI models, for instance, or to be value added through other mechanisms, such as what Ivado is doing here in Montreal. So it's not fundamentally incompatible. However, various IP laws today are not well adapted to protect the data as such. Thank you for pointing that out. We tend to compare ourselves in order to inspire ourselves. We talk about the Israeli model as a success when it comes to intellectual property and innovation. Could you tell us more about what characterizes their model and how they distinguish themselves from the Canadian model? I think there are major differences between the Israeli model and the Canadian model. The Israeli model is not afraid of identifying core technological sectors and putting a lot of money into a few companies that it thinks can be successful. So it's a very targeted approach. Very targeted. Whereas in Canada, for example, when you look at tax credits for R&D, that's an approach that is far more diffuse. It's very horizontal. We try to give a little bit to everyone in order to allow everyone to do a bit of R&D. That's the major difference. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Gravel. There's another difference. I don't know whether you saw this in the news recently. The CIC was recently announced by the government. Somebody floated the idea of having a clawback or a tax when the intellectual property of a Canadian company is sold outside. When Waze, for instance, an Israeli company was sold to Google, the Israeli government pocketed $360 million for that technological transfer. That might be one way to make sure that intellectual property developed here with public funds remains here, or at least if it's sold to the outside, we recover part of the money. Thank you very much, Mr. Gravel.
All right, moving on to our final member of Parliament, MP Cannings, for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, and I will stay with Monsieur Gravel for the time being. You mentioned some of the challenges that is facing the IP ecosystem, you could say, in Canada, and one was this time between the idea and the marketplace and the sustained support that was needed. If you could perhaps just expand on that a little bit more, what kind of support would be appropriate?
There's really a lot of different ways that this can be done. One of them, for example, could be a more streamlined procurement process from government. One stumbling block that companies have is that in order for them to be able to find investors, they need to prove that they've made some sales. Now, when you're a startup or an SME, it's extremely difficult to sell to government, especially if your technology involves computer-related innovations. No one wants to take a chance investing in a company or buying a product of a company that may or may not exist 2-3 years from now. I think having a procurement process where we can encourage the solutions that are made in Canada to be presented, tested within the Canadian government or the provincial governments would be an extraordinary way to allow these companies to refine their products and services and to bring them to other markets where they could generate more income.
And on a second piece, you talked about the sale of IP, and you just mentioned the idea of this clawback. Just wondering if you could perhaps expand on anything else around that problem of Canada losing IP when our companies are sold, and how we can try to retain that IP here in Canada, based on what you've heard today, and can expand on anything else we haven't heard.
Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Today, I've heard words like theft. I've heard words like losing. I've heard words like people taking advantage of some of the IP that's created in Canada. And I think we need to be very careful when we use words like this. I think for the past 30, 40, 50 years, Canada generally has been a very attractive destination for foreign investment. We've been able to attract foreign companies to open offices here in Canada. Some of those offices are commercialization offices, but a lot of them are research and development arms. And these companies hire local talent. That's why they're here. They subsidize and pay for research and development, and they own that IP that comes from that. There's no theft of IP there. There's no leakage of IP there. They come here, they pay the people to do R&D, they own the IP. It's as simple as that. The problem that we have fundamentally is that Canadian companies here that do R&D here are not leveraging the IP tools that they have at their disposal properly to be able to build assets upon which they can create value. That is fundamental. And that is why having an IP strategy from the start of the company, from the start of an innovation project, from the start of a pivot of a company to a different market, they are fundamental anchor points to be able to capture the IP that's then going to be created and protected so that we can build IP assets here that remain here at least as much as possible.
Thank you very much.
All right, that concludes our witnesses for today. I'd like to thank him again for presenting today at our Science Committee. A big thank you again to our members of Parliament as well. Just a quick reminder that our next scheduled meeting is until Tuesday, March the 21st. Is there agreement to adjourn this meeting? Seeing so, we now stand adjourned.